Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another video. Thanks for joining me on our next step as we learn all things about Linux, and specifically in this video, we're going to touch on SELinux. Now, this is an interesting concept because I feel like a lot of people don't understand this that well. And in the beginning, I didn't either, in full transparency. So I'm going to do my best to try to break this down for you all so that way you can understand how this works and the benefits of this, because this is something actually very, very critical. Now, before we jump into today's topic, of course, if you appreciate my content and it's helping you out a lot, go ahead and give me a like for the video as it helps the channel grow. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. That way you're notified when I upload new videos to the channel. And then lastly, of course, share this with a family member or friend who's also interested in learning about tech. Make sure you guys go ahead and take a look at the Linux playlist that I have in the description. Go ahead and follow it from the first video all the way up to this one. And the reason why I say that, of course, is because we work in chronological order. So meaning that ideas and concepts build on each other. So it's very easy for you to get lost if you're finding me for the first time and you're seeing this video. Unless if you are further along in your journey and you're just looking for something in particular. But for those who are just learning and dabbling for the first time and have no clue what Linux is, again, check out the description. Go ahead and click that playlist button, find the first video, and work your way up here. So that way you can understand how we got to this point. And as always, for my returning subscribers, I love you and I appreciate you. Thanks for coming back for another episode. And as always, if you want to talk to me about tech, if you have any questions, links to my calendar are also in the description below. So go ahead and check that out. And without further ado, let's jump into our desktop here, of course, and let's start talking a little bit about SELinux. So first and foremost, the question is, what does SELinux even stand for? And SELinux is Security Enhanced Linux. Now, it's important that we learn this, and the reason being is because think about it as a way to protect your operating system, even if someone is inside of it that is unauthorized or maybe unauthorized. And that's very, very critical. Now, if that sounds a little funny to you, the best way that I can put it is imagine you have a bank and you have money and lots of money in the vault. Now, imagine that you have somebody in your organization that has access to this bank, and therefore you want to protect the money that's in the vault. Well, how do you do that when a person, let's say, is authorized, meaning they're inside of the bank, and you don't want them to have access to this money? And if you might be asking yourself, well, who the heck will have that type of access, right? Shouldn't the people that work in there, right? Shouldn't they have access to the vault at all times? That makes a lot of sense. Well, in this case, let's pretend you are the janitor. Now, your only job is supposed to be to go into the bank and clean the offices. You should not really be having any access to the vault where the money is. But here's the problem with the janitor. The janitor has the master keys. So he can open up the bank, he can open up the offices in order to clean inside of the bank and inside of the offices. But should he have the keys in order to get into the vault and basically steal the money, right? No, we don't want that. So I think about it in that mentality as well when we're working with the operating system, meaning that if we're inside of the operating system, aka our Linux OS here, should people that have access to the operating system be given access to everything in the operating system? And that is a problem right there, right? That shouldn't be the case. So SELinux helps us protect the operating systems in ways that basic security enforcement can't. So let's just take a look at a basic example. So if I were to do a pwd print working directory, you can see here that I am under the var/www/html directory. Now you may be asking, well, why am I there? Well, the reason why I'm here is because before I started this video, I actually installed HTTPD. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what that is, all it is an Apache server. So it essentially allows you to create websites and serve it up. And so we can actually pull that up real quickly. So if I were to do a sudo systemctl status and then do HTTPD, you can see here that the Apache HTTP server, the service is actually running. And so essentially, any files that we put in here, so if I were to take a look at the files, we have a demo.html. Any files that I put in here, you can automatically bring up in a web browser. So Firefox, Chrome, whatever, it will go in here, take a look at what websites that you have or HTML files, and it'll start presenting it on the web browser. So that's a pretty cool thing. So now that we're here, let's go ahead and take a look at what's inside of this demo HTML so that way we can see it together. So if I were to do a sudo, and I'm going to open it with VI, and let's take a look at what's inside of this demo.html. So as you can see, there is nothing inside of this demo.html. It is a blank file. So at this point, we can actually write stuff inside of here, and then whatever we write inside of here gets actually shown whenever we launch a browser. So that's pretty cool. So let's actually populate this. Let's say learning SELinux with Costa E.T.F. Subscribe for more content. And by the way, if you guys are not familiar, since this is going to be an HTML file or a file that essentially describes websites, we actually have to put headers for this. Now, this is outside of the scope of the class, but if you are interested in working on websites, you can go ahead and obviously look at what I'm typing from examples online. There's tons of them. Maybe in the future, I should probably do a class around HTML, CSS, and all that fun jazz. Leave me a comment in the comment section below and let me know if you want to see content around that. So let's go ahead and make sure that when we open this file up in a browser, it knows that this is an HTML or a web file. So if we were to go on top over here and do insert. All right, great. So we made essentially our first website. Not a very sexy website, doesn't have a lot going on here, but essentially it is a basic website that we can load now with our web browser. So let's go ahead and do a file right quit. Let's clear some of the stuff over here so that way we start with the new screen here. So that looks good. Now here's the interesting thing. Let's go ahead and take a look at our file now. And we were to do that by doing an ls, and we can see that there is a demo.html. How do we open that up now with our web browser? So if I were to open up our web browser here, now with our web browser open, we can go ahead and type in the address to get to this HTML file. And by the way, since it's internal to us, meaning you don't have to go out to the internet, you can do localhost instead of www, which is the World Wide Web, which is outside of our computer. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that now. And just make sure you follow the commands if you're following with this particular example. So if I were to say http :/ say local host / and then we say the name of the file, which is demo.html. And of course, without fail, I always make mistakes when I'm making these videos. By the way, guys, if you haven't caught the problem, it's not local lost, it's local host. So let's go back in here. Local, and I say local lost like there's an extra L in there. There wasn't. I just forgot the H. It's local host. There we go. So it found the file. It says localhost / demo.html. And it says, quite interesting, it says forbidden. You don't have permission to access this resource. Well, why not? And this goes back to SELinux. So let's say, for example, we have somebody who has keys to the operating system or keys to the bank, as we talked about, which is the janitor. Well, what if we open up the file? So if we were to take a look at, and by the way, I'm doing an HLA or LAH on the particular file. So let's say demo. So you can see here that it says read, write, read, write, read. That's the permission. What if we were to do sudo chmod 777, meaning we're going to open up all permissions to this demo file. Let's take a look at it now. So you see it turns green. And if I were to do ls LAH on that demo file, now you can see the difference from before. Read, write access for the entire world. Let's bring up our web browser now, and let's just refresh and see what happens. And still, we're getting that 403 forbidden. We can't access that resource, even though I opened it up entirely to the world, right? So what gives? Why can't we see this file? And if you don't believe that this is actually true, meaning I did the refresh, we can actually copy, and let's go and close this out. Let's open up a brand new web browser again, and we can paste the results. So let's go ahead and put our HTTP localhost demo. And as you're seeing, same thing, right? It's forbidden. We can't access the resource. And even though we opened up the file to the whole entire world, and again, this goes back to SELinux. You can have keys to the operating system, but once you're in there, do you have access to the resource that you're trying to access? And this is the beauty of SELinux. Now, here's another way to prove that SELinux is actually protecting us, I guess you would say in this case. Because imagine if you're that janitor, you opened up the keys to the bank, or AKA the operating system. Is your resource, meaning the money, still protected? Or in this case, this particular HTML file. So there are commands that actually allow you to work with SELinux to either disable it, enable it, or disable it partially. And we can talk about what they mean. And we'll tie it back to what we're seeing here from a SELinux perspective as we are trying to access a particular resource, which is this HTML file here. So let's talk about it real quick. The three commands that you can use in order to work with SELinux in order to enable it, disable it, or partially disable it is called enforcing, permissive, and disabled. I think enforcing is self-explanatory. Disabled, also self-explanatory. And then the last one we could talk about is permissive. What does permissive mean? So permissive means that the policies for SELinux are loaded, but they're not enforced. And if a policy is violated, essentially all it does is it logs it, but it doesn't enforce it. And we can show that in just a second. So before we actually start changing stuff for SELinux, the question now is, how do we know where we are with SELinux? Meaning, are we in enforcing? Are we in disabled? Are we in permissive mode? What does that look like? And in order to understand what that looks like, you have to use the command get. And by the way, I'm showing you what is available when you type in get en. And I do that with tab completion. So you see that there's the two options here, but after you say get, the one that I'm interested in is enforce. So let's put an F there, and then we do tab completion, and let's hit enter and see what we get. So you can see here that it is enforcing. Our SELinux right now is enforcing, meaning the policies are loaded and they're enforcing those policies. So let's do permissive now. And the reason why I want to do permissive is because I want the policies loaded, I want them monitored, but I don't want you to enforce them. And that actually allows me to see what I have going on here when it comes to this particular HTML file. Again, it's like saying we're going to bring down our defenses, but we're still going to monitor what happens when we bring down those defenses. So in order to set SELinux into permissive mode, let's do a sudo set. And by the way, can you guess what the next part would be? One command is get enforce. Well, the other one would be set enforce. See, it's not so hard. This is pretty easy. So once we do sudo set enforce, let's type in permissive and let's hit enter on this and see what we get. And of course, I can't seem to type apparently, or I keep making mistakes. Let's try this again. So let's do set enforce. I don't know what set enforce is. There we go. See, tab completion is always your best friend. So let's do enter again and see what we get. All right, cool. So that seemed to work. Now, I'm kind of curious, how many mistakes can I make in a video of the commands before I finish? Anyways, that's another topic. So now that we've set our SELinux to permissive, let's go ahead and check it now. So if we were to do a get enforce again, we should see permissive. So there you go. See the difference? The difference is enforcing. The other now is permissive. All right, cool. So now that our SELinux is no longer enforcing the policies, that means now that we should be able to access that HTML file because it's not enforcing things. So if I were to bring here our web browser, right, Firefox, Let's do a refresh again and see what we get. And look at that. That is really cool. So you're learning SELinux with Acosta E.T.F. So subscribe for more content. And by the way, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. So this is how you're able to see that SELinux is really what's driving whether or not you have access to this content, even though you're inside of the operating system, even though you opened up the file wide open, but it's that extra layer of protection in order to make sure that your particular resources are secured at all times. Now let's go ahead and change our enforce to enforcing again. And in order to do that, of course, we change from permissive to enforcing. Now let's go ahead and get enforce just to see what our SELinux policies look like. Okay, so it's enforcing now. Great. So if I were to bring up again, our demo file or our demo HTML, let's go ahead and refresh. And you could already tell it's already at 403 forbidden. You don't have access for this resource. So this is a clear indication that the problem that we have all along in order to access this particular resource is that SELinux policy doing its job. I wouldn't call that a problem. It's just doing what it was meant to do. So if we go back to that bank analogy, you have this janitor that can come into your bank. They have access to the entire bank in order to clean the offices, the rooms, and open up the bank itself, right? But we still want that vault protecting the money that's in there. We don't want people to steal our stuff. And that's exactly what is happening here. So SELinux is enforcing policies to make sure that even though you have access to the operating system, you only have access to the particular resources that you need. So the question now is, and this is the last thing I'll share with you guys before letting you go, because we're going to have to make this into multiple part videos. Like this can be a whole book on its own as far as SELinux. So the question now is, if it's enforcing, how do we get it to show our resources, even though we really want to see this HTML file? So in order to see that, let's do an ls, and I'll say LAH, and let's put a dash in front of that so we know it's the options. And here's the thing that you're going to add. You're going to add a capital Z. And a capital Z basically says, hey, show me the SELinux context. You're going to see some additional information for SELinux with that capital Z. And so if we were to target our demo HTML, and by the way, the reason why we can target our demo.html is because we are inside of the directory where that file lives. So let's hit enter. And you can see here that, of course, we opened up all the privileges early on. That doesn't really matter. But here's the most important thing. You have this right here. This looks interesting. And I won't dive into this video of exactly what that means, but just know that that is information all around SELinux. And so I'm going to show you the differences in just a moment of how we can leverage it for the right SELinux context. And in other videos, I'm going to break this down of what exactly this even means. So that way we can learn a little bit more about SELinux. But for now, let's just change this issue that we have. Not really an issue, it's SELinux doing its job. But let's change the SELinux context so that way we can access the resource while SELinux is enforcing its policies, right? Now, in order for you guys to see the differences between the two, I'm going to create another file. I'll call it demo2 instead of just demo.html. So let's do a sudo copy and take our demo and let's copy it to our desktop, or should I say our home directory. So home, and we'll call this demo2.html. So now we can do an ls-lah, and let's do that Z in there. And then let's target that demo2, which is in our home directory. There it is. And so here are the differences. And the differences are, of course, we have the owner and the groups. And the reason why it's root instead of El Acosta is because I use sudo. I elevated my privileges. But other than that, pretty much a lot of it is still the same, meaning look at our SE context. It looks pretty much exactly the same as the other one. And in fact, actually, if we take a look, unconfined underscore u object, right? So if we look user home S0, 113, so all that is actually pretty much the same. Nothing's different there. The only other difference, of course, is our permissions. So our permissions are a little slightly different, but let's go ahead just to make this apples to apples. We'll go ahead and make it the same. So we'll say chmod 777, and we can do a sudo in front of that. And let's target this home demo2. Now let's do the same command again. And you can see it's pretty much the same now. Demo2 is the same as demo, or you can call it demo1 if you want to. So now here's the difference though. Let's change the SE context. Let's reset it. And you can see the difference between the two and how SELinux will go ahead and enforce it, meaning give you access to the proper resources. You'll see that in real time, by the way. So after changing the permissions of our demo2, and again, let's do a quick ls-lah, and let's do our demo2 that sits in my home directory. As you can see here that we have that 777, which of course is read, write, execute across the board for our demo2. Let's go ahead now and move this file into our HTML directory. And again, if I do a pwd, this is the directory where these HTML files live in order to, again, when you're working with websites and you want to bring up that website, this is where those files live. So if I were to do a sudo move, and let's go ahead and target our home and do demo2, and let's go ahead and do a period forward slash, and a period forward slash just says, hey, take the file and move it in the directory which I'm currently in. And again, print working directory tells us that we are in var www html. So let's hit enter. Now, in order to make things easy on the eyes, I'm going to go ahead and do a ls-lahz on both files. That way we can see the SELinux context on it. And that will also tell us the differences between the two. So ls-lah demo HTML. Let's do the same thing now for demo2. And of course, I forgot to put in the Z in there. So let's add a capital Z. And of course, we'll do the first one, which is demo. And then let's go ahead and do the same thing now for demo2. Again, how many mistakes can I make before we wrap up the video? So the big thing here is that the SELinux context is actually the same. And as you recall earlier, we were having issues accessing the resource because the SELinux is enforcing. And there you go. It says forbidden, right? We got a 403 error. So you don't have permissions to access this resource. So now I'm going to show you guys a command in order to restore its Linux context. And that will help us solve this issue that you're seeing here. And it'll allow us to access the resource while SELinux is under enforcing. And again, it does this in order to protect our resource. It goes back to that analogy about the bank where you have that janitor that has the keys to open up all the doors, but you still want your vault protected, which has the money inside of it. So again, in this case, you have somebody who has access to the operating system, but you still want resources protected. And so hence why SELinux is important. So let's go ahead and go back now to our terminal and let's restore the context so that way we can see the resource. And in order to do that, we can do a sudo restore con -v, and let's focus on demo2. And let's hit enter here and see what we get. Now, interesting, you see it says relabeled from unconfined _u object _r user home to, look at the difference now. Now it says httpd _sys _content _t. Very interesting because before it was user _home _t. In this case now, SELinux gave it a different context, and now it's saying that it is content, essentially content for HTTPD. So if I were to go now and bring up our web browser, and let's go ahead and instead of doing a demo, which is the original one, remember we changed the SELinux context for demo 2, not demo 1. So I'm showing you the differences between the two, right? So if we were to do demo 2, you see it says learning SELinux with Acosta E.T.F. Subscribe for more content. So it's awesome that you can see that. And now because our original demo has this user underscore home T, because that is the case, we don't have access to those resources. And again, if I were to show you that, let's do our demo and get rid of the 2 in there. You can see it says 403 forbidden, and I'm getting this error now for demo, but demo 2 works. And why does demo 2 work? Well, that's because we changed our SELinux context, and we can actually do the same thing for the original demo in order to showcase that. I just wanted to separate the 2 files in order to show you that this is how you can do that with SELinux. So just to prove out my point, let's go ahead and do the same thing for the original demo. There we go. It relabeled it. Now we can go ahead and refresh for demo, which is already here. And you can see that it says learning SELinux with Acosta E.T.F. Subscribe for more content. So now you're seeing that SELinux is enforcing and it's doing the work that it needs to do. Now, before I let you go, we did talk about how you enforce it. We talked about how you can do permissive, meaning it's not 100% disabled. It's not enforcing the policies, but it's logging any issues associated with those policies. But how do you disable it completely? Now, in order to go ahead and disable SELinux, the command in order to do that is sudo grubby --update kernel all --arg SELinux equals 0. So we can go ahead and hit enter here. Now let's go ahead and reboot the machine. And by the way, when it comes to rebooting, I also forgot to mention earlier, when you are doing permissive, let's say you set up your SELinux policy to permissive, meaning, hey, I want you to log things, but don't enforce anything. When you actually reboot your machine, you go ahead and basically turn everything back on to enforcing. That's on the permissive side. Now, this command specifically that we just ran, even after a reboot, will go ahead and disable SELinux entirely, even after a reboot. So let's just do a reboot real quick, bring up the operating system, and we're gonna see if it is not enforcing it anymore. So let's do a sudo reboot, see what we get. So after the reboot with our terminal up and running, let's do a get enforce. And we can see here that it says disabled. So let's go back to our command previously, and let's change this 0 back to a 1, hit enter, and let's go ahead and do a sudo reboot. Now, here's the interesting thing, guys. I don't know if you're seeing on my screen now, but I did this on purpose where we did a 0 to disable everything, and then we did a 1 in order to enable it back, and we also did a reboot. Now, if you're noticing, it's taking my machine a lot longer to reboot, and there's a reason for that. Whenever you are disabling and then you're enabling SELinux again, in that process of rebooting, when you're enabling it back, it will take a while to go ahead and boot up, because during the boot up process, what it's doing now, it is labeling all the files that you disabled before. So now it's going in and labeling all the files with the SELinux context that it needs. So this will take a little bit to redo. So essentially what I'm telling you is careful what you type in, because it will actually, in this case, take a while now to boot, because it has to go back and put the SELinux context to all the files, whereas you disabled them before. So that's why permissive is also a very important mode to have, because it allows you to test things without having to go through this process. Imagine if you're doing some policies and you're having to test, and you have to constantly disable, enable, and then wait for this whole process to finish. I mean, that'll take you forever. So hence why you're seeing another reason why permissive is such a great option to choose, because it allows you to essentially not enforce the policies, but still go ahead and keep things logged and make things a lot easier for you. So while this computer is labeling all my files now, and it'll take a while for this to come back, I will let you guys go. Go ahead and continue practicing. Hopefully you found this first video on SELinux to be helpful. Remember, I'm going to make more additional content on this because it's much more than what you're seeing today. But at a minimum, go ahead, practice. Practice makes perfect. If you have any questions, go ahead and put it in the comment section below. That'll do for this video, guys. Love you, appreciate you. Thanks for joining me here on this video. And again, if this video is helping you out, go ahead and give me a like for the video as it helps this channel grow. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. That way you're notified when I upload new videos to the channel. And lastly, share this with a family member or friend who's also interested in learning about tech. And by the way, guys, looks like my machine came up and it labeled all the files before I had to do my outros. So pretty cool how it was doing that in real time as I was recording everything. But anyways, if you don't want to wait for my next video to drop, as this thing was working, I guess, YouTube thinks that you'll like this video popping up on screen. So go ahead and give that a watch, and I'll see you all in the next video.